Hello and welcome to another Python tutorial. So again, we're continuing exploring the Win32com library. So we've seen in previous videos that we can, create Python formulas using this particular library. We can manipulate our Excel, our PowerPoint, basically all of our Office applications from a Jupyter notebook and just make the process really seamless. So we're not really changing anything. We're just kind of doing what we're normally used to doing inside of VBA. Now we're just doing it with a different language and a little bit of a different environment. Now, in today's video, we're going to cover a new topic that I think a lot of people will probably find useful. I'm going to consider this more of the introduction to this topic just because there's a lot we can do with it. But the goal is we're going to go and create an object library that basically is being behind the scenes is being run in Python code, but we're going to create an object library that is digestible for VBA. So it's something very similar to what we were doing with the Python formulas, where we're going to go and create an object. We're going to call that object from inside VBA, and then we'll run the code using VBA. So as an example, kind of to demonstrate at the end of the video, what we're going to be able to achieve is we already have some code here, but the first one is just going to go and pull some URLs, and then this other one's going to take this data right here and transform it into a JSON string. And so when I run this one, what it does is it goes and fetches my URL, and then I put over here, hey, look, now it's a JSON string. So it's basically a list of dictionaries and things like that. So we're going to see how we can implement this using Python. Now, obviously, this does open up the door to so much more. I'm keeping the examples limited in this one just because there's really a lot we can do. But I think most people are going to find this topic pretty useful. So you can plan on seeing more topics on this, more videos on this topic. Okay, so the first thing you got to do is you're going to go into your Visual Studio editor or whatever environment that you're currently working out of. And then from here, what we got to do is we got to import some libraries. We're going to import a couple libraries just because I'm going to be using different functions that depend basically on those libraries. Okay, so the first one is we're going to import the Win32com .client. So that's just, basically what we're used to doing. So this allows us to basically plug in to our Win32com objects. The next one is going to be the Pythoncom library. This will allow us to leverage basically a built-in function that will allow us to create a GUID that we can use to register our particular object library with, or com object, I guess it should be a little bit more specific, but our com object with Windows. And then we need a couple more. The next one is going to be, oh wait, my bad, it's not import. It's going to be from BS4 import beautiful soup. So we're going to import and use beautiful soup in our code. That's going to be more related to our web scraping component. So the one where you have a URL, you feed in the URL, and it's just going to go out and get a certain number of links, basically. And then the final one is we're going to say from URL lib dot request import the request object, and then URL open. So this one is really being pulled in because of this one. We need a framework to go out and fetch our requests, and we need a framework to open our URLs and process all that information. So in order to kind of do what we need to do with Beautiful Soup, we need to use this library. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're going to go and create our, in a sense, our library. It is simply a class instance inside of Python, and then we just give our class a name. It's going to be Python object library, just like that. We put our colon, and then we're going to pass through a couple pieces of information. Each one of these pieces of information is necessary when it comes to either registering the object or just allowing us to kind of determine beforehand, program IDs, which methods we want available. Very important stuff when it comes to using this particular library. Now, probably the most important one right out of the get-go is we need to create an ID that is unique to this object. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do underscore reg CLSID and then underscore again. We're going to go into our Pythoncom library, and we're going to call the create GUID. and then I believe that is all lowercase. This will create basically a CLS ID for us that we can use to register our particular object. So really what we're doing here is creating an ID to register it with Windows. I mean, really at the end of the day, that's just all we're kind of doing. Okay, the next one. This is an important one. This one, if we don't specify, for some people, it might cause an error. Other people, it doesn't. So what we have to do is we have to specify whether we want to register our particular object as an exe file or a DLL file. In my particular example, at least on my system, I need to do an exe file. I have not tried a DLL file. On this particular system, the one that I'm currently using to record the video, DLL file seems to not work. I'm not really sure why on that one. I'm just trying to do some more research, and when I kind of come across the answer, I'll try to, pass that along. Okay, so we're going to register the object as an exe file. The alternative is a DLL file. And so what we're going to do is underscore reg CLS CTX and then underscore, and then it's going to be Pythoncom again, and then it's going to be CLS CTX local underscore server. Okay, so now that we've done that, we need to give it a program ID. So this is kind of like our readable program ID that should be unique. So define the program ID. It's very similar to like the PowerPoint object library 16.0 or something like that. That would be kind of what we're doing here. So register the program ID, and then this one will be, in this example, we'll do a string, and then it will be the Python.API library. Now, it's not really working with APIs, but just to give it something unique, I kind of deal with this one as like, oh, you're working with JSON, you're working with, Beautiful Soup. So these are kind of like more web-based stuff, right? That was kind of my logic behind it. Okay, and then if you wanted to, you could put a description. That is optional. I'm not going to do it in this video. If you see my Python formula one, I kind of go over how to do that. It's just another string and another ID. Now, the final part that we need to do is we need to register the public methods of our particular library. And so that's going to be underscore public underscore methods, and then underscore again. It will be a bracket. It will be, the first one will be called poll URL. I'll do this way. Links. And then the second one is going to be called convert to JSON. So again, it's just a list of all the methods that you want available, and then it's simply the name of each method separated by a comma, and they are both strings, so they all need to be strings. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can define our particular functions or methods that we want to make available. The first one that we said is going to be poll URL links. So what this will be is poll URL links. And then this is going to take a couple parameters. One is the object itself. The next is a URL. And then next is an Excel range. Let's kind of walk through what the goal of this particular method is going to do. So my goal is to create some kind of method where if I pass through a URL, I can either have it attached to a cell value or I can pass through a string that represents that URL. What it will do is it will go and fetch that web page basically, and then it's going to go and find a certain number of links. The links are going to be determined by the number of cells that I want populated with those links. So for example, if I select cell B18 to B25, I don't even know how many cells that is. Let me check. That would be 10 links basically. So the number of links it's going to go and fetch for us is dependent on the size of the range. So I'm trying to make it dynamic where, if I pass in a certain number of cells, it knows how many to go out and get, basically. Okay, so now that we know kind of how this is supposed to work, let's just break it down in its basic section. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to request the URL and initialize the list that will store the URLs. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define a new parameter called request. This will take our request object, and then we will pass through the URL that is coming from our method. So it's just being passed through. And then from here, we're going to create a new variable called HTML page. We will take the URL open method, and then we will pass through the request. So this will open the URL, we'll get the contents of that URL page, and then from here, we need to do one final thing, that is initialize our column list. I call it column list because the way I like to do it, at least for me and my sanity, when I'm working with these ranges, I want to think of the outer list as my column, and then each individual list inside of that column as a row. So this is just kind of how I keep my sanity. Again, it's up to you how you want to do it, but for me, I've kind of found that that helps me get through it at least. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go and get the HTML content. So get the HTML content, and that's going to be very straightforward. We're going to create a new variable called soup. We will call our beautiful soup object. We will pass through the HTML page, and then we need to define a parser. Well, in this case, we know it's HTML, so it makes sense to do an HTML parser. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're going to loop through and find all of the particular tags of that particular web page. Now, if you've seen my video on beautiful soup and web scraping with the Win32com library, I kind of go into detail about kind of how that works. So if you're looking at this code after I do it and you're not really sure what's going on, please watch that video because I'm not going to go into too much detail. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to say for link in soup. So the content itself, find all of those tags. Sorry, it should be find all, capital A, and then we got to specify the tag we're looking for. We're looking for the A tags. Those represents the links. We're going to create a new list called row that will store each link. And then from here, we're going to take our row list. We're going to append it with the link in all of our A tags. And then we're going to get the href. So we're going to actually go and get the actual link that belongs to this particular tag at that point in the loop. And then we're going to take the column list. We're going to append that one, but now we're going to append it with the row list. Go and get the links, something like that. Okay, so now that we have that, what we're going to do is now we're working with our Excel object. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get our worksheet, dispatch the range, and define, I think it's define our application. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable called Excel app, go into win32com.client. We'll get the active object, so the one that we're currently using when we run this code. And the next one I won't use get active object. This is kind of just to show you the variety behind it. You can do either one. Each one is fine. Okay, now that we've done that, we'll define our Excel range. That will equal the Win32com. We'll go into the client. We'll use late binding this time. And then again, dispatch. But this one, we're going to dispatch the Excel range that we're passing through. The reason why is because I'm going to be working with that particular range in the sense of I have to count cells and then I have to put values next to it and all that kind of jazz. It's just easier to dispatch that range, and then it's just easier to work with where now we can actually reference it, and it's just a little bit more straightforward. Okay, so now that we're going to do that, we need to determine the number of links that we want to return back to the user. Well, that depends on the number of cells in the Excel range that we pass through. So we will create a new variable called number of links. This will equal our Excel range. We'll go into the cells property, and then we will go into the count property. And now that we've done that, something I like to do is just to add some logic just to make sure if there's some stuff there, we can slice it correctly. So we'll say if the number of links is simply greater than the length of the column list, then what you can do is just simply return the entire column list, and you don't need to do anything else. So we'll just pass through the column list. Else, what we can do is we'll say, hey, the column list is only going to be a slice of the original column list. So we'll say, hey, take the column list, bracket 0, and then go to the number of links that we want. So if it was 10, it would be 0 to 10, and it would slice it. So slice the list if necessary, or else return the entire list. That's kind of how I like to do it. Okay, and now that we've done that, what we can do is we can simply take our Excel range object, we will call the value property, and that will equal our column list. And so this is basically where we're populating the cells. So hopefully you guys followed that. Again, if you're confused with this stuff, I do have a video on it. Please make sure to watch it if you're kind of confused. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's define our next method. This one will be called convert to JSON. I think it's lowercase. This again will take a couple parameters. The first one is self. The next one is the key range. The next one is the data range. And then the final one is the destination range. Let's walk through and kind of explain why I did that. So what is the intention of this method? Well, I have a range like this. I'm assuming that the column headers are my keys. And then I have a data set, right? And so basically what I want to do is I want to create a JSON structure. And so I want a list of dictionaries where each one of these rows would be a dictionary where this is the key and then these are the corresponding values for that key. So in this example, if I was at Sarah, the key for Sarah would be name, age would be 31, salary would be 120,000. It will create all those dictionaries, it will store them in a list, and then it will return that list to the destination that I specify. So if I want it here, it will return it here. If I return it here, it will return it here. So it's about specifying it and kind of adding some flexibility. Now, what you could do is you could just simply return the value and then store it in a variable. But again, for demonstration purposes, just assume you wanted to specify the destination inside of the actual method itself. Okay, so now that we know that, let's go and kind of work through this one. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go get the key values. This one is we're going to create a new object called key range. It will equal the Win32com. Go into the clients. We'll again do late binding. You could do early binding. There's nothing stopping you. We'll call dispatch. And then we'll specify the key range. Now from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a new variable called key value that will equal my key range. So the range object, I'll call the value property. And when we return the value property, it's going to be a tuple within a tuple. Now I just want the first row of that inner tuple, so I'll just say, hey, return the first row. If you're confused by that, print it out. It'll make much more sense when you print it out. If you're ever confused about value, just print it out and look at it a couple times, and right away you will know why we have to do it like that. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's get the data values. So we'll get the data values. Again, this one will be called data range, and it will equal this. But now what we're doing is we're passing through the data range. And then from here, again, the data values will equal the data range, and then it will be the value property. Now this one, I don't care about getting just a particular row. I want all of them back, so I just leave it as is. And then the final one, what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, specify the destination range, and then this one will equal that. And I'm just going to copy that, paste it down here, and then we'll specify the destination range as the one that we want to pass through our Win32com. Okay, so from here now we can actually start creating our JSON structure. So what I'm going to do is we're going to initialize an empty list. This will house all of our dictionaries. Dictionary liar, right? Okay, now that we have that empty list for all of our dictionaries, we'll loop through each row in our data, and then we'll loop through each element in our particular row. And then what we'll basically do is we'll assign this as the key, and then this is the value that is associated with that key. So what we're going to do is we're going to say for row in data values, we'll initialize our empty dictionary. I'll call it JSON dictionary. And then from here, what we'll do is we'll say for each index, comma, and then element in, and then we're going to enumerate the row so that way we have an index. This will come in handy when I'm trying to go and access this particular tuple. It will make more sense. And then what we're going to do is we're going to define the key. So we're going to say JSON dictionary. The key is going to simply be our key value tuple, and then the index on that particular one. And then we want that to be assigned to the element that we are in on our particular loop when we're looping through that row. So what I kind of like to think of it is, okay, loop through each row, loop through this one, and this one. These are each element. As you can tell, when we're looping through it, this has an index of 0, for example. Well, so does the key value. This one has an index of 1. Well, so does the key value. This one has an index of 2. Well, so does the key value. So really all I'm doing is I'm just kind of taking a segment of this one, and I'm just making sure they're lining up with that particular column in the row. And then really with that, we'll find that's really all we need. I mean, it's kind of simple. Ideally, we don't want to make it too complicated at this point, but really it's kind of working for us at that. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's take our dictionary list, and what we'll do is we will append it with the JSON dictionary. So basically we're adding that dictionary to the list. And then what we can do now is we can populate the actual value. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pass through a string. And then we're pretty much good to go. So this one is create the JSON structure. And then populate the range. And then something I like to do, is, or at least a good habit we should get into, I didn't do it up above, but we really should. We should just release our objects just to make sure they're, not doing anything in the background that we're not expecting. In fact, let me go up here and see if I have anything. I'll just leave it for right now. Okay, so we have our two methods. One is convert to JSON. One is just getting our links. Now let's register it. I'm just going to take the one that I already have. There we go. So this is how we register it. If you saw the Python Formula 1, hopefully this makes sense. Now that we've done that, we can register it. Let me just double check some stuff. Convert to JSON. Pull URL links. I'm happy. Yes. Okay. You got to keep in mind, if you misspell something or something like that, it returns this error or it doesn't do anything. You're like, well, why does it not work? It's not necessarily that the code was wrong. It just means that there was potentially something wrong that you misspelled or something like that. Especially when I'm doing a bunch of code like this, the chances of me making an error dramatically increases, unfortunately. Okay, so let's go back into our VBA editor. Now what we're going to do is we're going to write the code. This is hopefully a lot easier than what we were doing over there. So we'll create a new subroutine. We will call it test, just for simplicity at this point. We need to define our objects and our variables. So define our variables. The first one will be called my URL, That will be as a string. Next one will be Excel range, key range, data range, and destination range. And then these ones will all be range. Get rid of that last comma. Keep in mind, you have to declare your variables. Otherwise, the Python library will not know what's being passed through to it. And it goes to the default, which is just like a Python dispatch object. And that's not good. You don't want to do that. So it's very important that you specify your data types and your variables. Otherwise, you will get yourself into a whole bunch of trouble. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new instance of our object library. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say my Python object equals VBA create object. It is the program ID and API library. I gotta just make sure I'm spelling it correctly. And then the first one is going to be pulling the URLs. So first thing is we'll define our input variables. The first one will be called my URL. We will simply pass through https://www.apple.com and then / string again. Set our Excel range. So where do we want the links to go? This will be from range B18 to B25. That's good. And then call the method. That should be my Python object pull URL links, and then it's going to take the two parameters, my URL and then the Excel range. Let's test it out and see if it works. Oh, well, I know why that happened. Okay, so the first one worked fine. As you can tell, it went and got our URLs for us. Let's do the next one. So the next one takes three parameters. One is the key range, next is the data range, and then the final one is the destination range. So we will set key range equal to range B2 D2. I'm just going to copy this a couple times, save some typing. And then we need data range and then our destination range. That one will take D14, and then this one will go from B3 to D6. D6. And here, what am I doing? Define our input variables for method 2. Boop, boop. Okay, and now we will call method 2. And we'll just copy this one, just right up to here. Bam. Convert to JSON. And then we will do the key range, the data range, and then we need the destination range. Okay, now that we've done that, let's test it again. Cool. So it looks like it worked fine. It created a nice little JSON string for us. I think that's pretty cool. Hopefully you guys thought that was cool. I thought that was cool. I think it's just awesome now that we can basically take all these Python libraries and we're just now putting them in VBA. And it's not even that complicated. I mean, literally, it might look complicated at first, but this is not that much code. And really, once you know how to use the library, you're pretty much good to go. So again, I kind of want to just, let's take a step back, take the 10,000 foot view, and really just see kind of what we were doing. Okay, so first thing we did, we defined a class. This is our object library. This contains all the methods of our particular object library. Now, whenever we create an object library, there's certain pieces of information that we need to pass through to Windows, so that way they understand kind of how to handle this thing. The first one is we've got to give it an ID, something that's unique, something that when Windows goes and looks for it, where do they go and what do they look for? This ID is what they're going to be looking for. We need to specify what type of file is this? Is it an exe file, a DLL file? This comes into handy when, again, we're having these certain errors or we just want to be more explicit about what type of file we want it to be. Now, in my example, I chose an exe file. We then give it a more, I would call it human-friendly ID. This is something that's easier to read and interpret. It'd be much better than using that wonderful GUI ID, which is I think like 26 characters and they're all numbers and letters. So we define a readable ID. And then here's another important step. We can have 20 methods, but maybe we only want 2 to be public. If we don't specify those 2, when we go and run our code in VBA, it's going to be like, hey, you're trying to call a method that doesn't exist. It's because we never specified it that it existed. So it's important that we do this step so that way when we run it in VBA, they understand what we're talking about in behind the scenes. And then all we did is we defined our 2 methods. The first one was pull URL links. All this one did was it took a URL, requested it, opened it up, took all the HTML content. We then looped through all the content with all the particular tags that had an A associated with it. So if it was an A tag, we looped through each one of those. And then all we did is we got the link, we stored that link in a list, and then we stored that list in another list. So that way it was easier to transfer it back into the Excel worksheet. Then we created our Excel objects. We needed to determine how many links we wanted to return back. Well, that was always determined by the size of the Excel range that we passed through. We added a little bit of logic just to make sure things operated properly. This isn't going to stop all problems, but it will save us from that problem where, well, what happens if you're trying to pass through, a range where it's asking for 100 links, but there's only 10 of them? Well, this way, if that ever happens, what will happen is it just returns the entire list of links, and then we're good to go. Otherwise, it will give us a portion of that particular list. And then all we did is we populate the Excel range. Then we had our second method, which was converting basically a data range into a JSON string. It took 3 parameters, a key range, a data range, and a destination range. Well, the key range, those were just going to be the keys of our dictionary. Now, because we're dealing with a value property, we understand that it's a tuple within a tuple. So I just want the first row of that tuple. That's what I'm doing here. And then I had my data range. Well, at that particular example, I didn't care if I wanted a particular row. I just wanted all of them. And then I specified a destination range. And then all I'm doing here is I'm just dispatching them so that way they're easier to work with. I initialize my empty list. This will contain all the dictionaries. And then I start looping through each row of that particular data range value. I initialize a new empty dictionary. And then what I do is I loop through each element in that row, making sure to enumerate that tuple so that way I have an index and an element. That comes in handy when I'm having to go and get my particular key value, because we know that they have the same column length. So if this is index 1, that will be index 1 of my key value tuple. If that has an index of 2, that will be an index of 2. Well, technically it starts at 0. So 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. So that's what I was doing here. And then once I finished all that, I took my JSON dictionary, I put it into my dictionary list, and I did that for each row. And then what I did is I finally took that final, basically final finished product, I converted it to a string, and then I set it equal to that particular destination range value. And then I released my objects from memory, I registered it, and then I jumped into VBA and did all of that kind of fun stuff. So, with that being said, we have finished the video. Sorry if that was a little bit of a longer one, but I think this is good information, and if you guys haven't realized already, I try to go into detail about things. I think that's important. So if you have any questions about kind of what we covered today, or you just want a little bit more insight as to kind of why I approached it the way I approached it, please put them down in the comments below. I'll try to get back to you and answer if there's something I feel like I can answer. Sometimes, especially with the Win32com one, it's not necessarily straightforward and there's not a lot of resources out there. So I totally understand where you're coming from. But yeah, so again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them down in the comments. Other than that, though, thanks again for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next video.